welcome to the Mindset Michelle TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us again for another amazing, incredible interview. And today we have an extra special guest. We have the lovely Danielle Chiel. Hello, Danielle.
Hello, Michelle. Good morning. How are you?
Good afternoon and good evening and good night. It's so wonderful having you on the show, Danielle. And I know that people watching will be watching from all over the world. So hello to everybody watching wherever you are as well. For those of you that aren't aware of Danielle, well, you're in for such a real treat today. She's an academic, she's a founder as a businesswoman for many, many years. And she's also, I haven't seen it in your CV, but I think you're a social activist as well, Danielle, because the work that you do and the important things that you and your organisations do or have done over the years is really something that even it was doing social activism work long before it was even called that. But before I talk about it, Danielle, please share with everybody your incredible background and how you came to be doing the amazing, incredible work that you do.
Thanks, Michelle. It's really funny, I think, how people end up doing what they do. That most of us know what we do in our 20s is not what we do in middle-aged life. And so as those of you who can see me can tell, I'm a middle-aged woman firmly planted in that, that age group. And so, you know, as you grow older, you get lots of life experience. So as a little girl, I grew up with two working parents. As it happens, both of them were pharmacists. So I grew up behind a counter. I would go to work with them. And my first sort of business experience, for want of a better word, is helping people or serving people behind the counter. Because in those days, when somebody came in with a prescription, and as it is now, but the pills and the medicine were not ready made. So they had to wait while the pills were counted or the ointment was made or the medicine was made. So this newfandangled word of compounding chemists was the norm in those days. So when I came to work, my father, who would go out the back to make these medicines, would say to me, it's not okay to leave the customers ambly wandering around by themselves. I'm going to leave you on the counter. Please talk with them. So when the customers would see a little girl just perched on the counter, they would naturally start to chat. And I guess intuitively as a little girl, I've always loved colour. And on the pharmacy counter, there were lipsticks. So just randomly, I would pick up a lipstick and I would say, this matches your dress. This matches your handbag. I think this would really look nice on you. And so it didn't take too long then to my father to say, why don't you actually try and match something that would look nice on her face? So my father obviously had DNA, you know, business in his DNA. So I was only doing this for a month before I went straight to the chase, and I'd pick up a lipstick and I'd say, I think this would look really nice on you. And inevitably that was the forerunner, you know, of do you want fries with that? So I learned to sell from a very early age, and it was all about how you looked and what looked great and what made you feel good.
What an interesting story about learning to sell and learning to relate to people as well. That's what I'm imagining, is that little girl really getting that training about how to be with people, talk to people about what's going on with their lives, because I'm sure you talked about many other things besides the lipstick and the colours, but that customer interaction that you would have had lots and lots of time to do, and would have created this really deep understanding from when you were very young as well about what's going on for people, especially as they're kind of relaxed while they're waiting for their medication. But Danielle, with that interesting background and journey into sales from such a young age, what do you think then, given your stage of life and the things that you've been involved in, what would you say success means to you?
Success means so many things to so many people. I think on average, when you mention that word to most people, it refers to money. I don't have a large income, but I feel that I've had a very successful life because my life's path has experienced, I've had a very rich life of experiences, a rich life of people that I've met, a rich life of education. I've traveled the world meeting amazing people. When I was doing my PhD, I was in communist Hungary, ferreting out various information. I've been on Necker with Richard Branson when I wasn't an academic, connected with my entrepreneurial and with my business journey. I've met quite interesting people along the way and experienced a lot, including having major heart surgery is something that I've done in India. So success to me is more than being able to support yourself and money. Success is always being able to adapt, to working out what's going to give you the best life and what it is you want to achieve at life.
And I think that that's a very key thing. So thank you for that. That's really lovely to hear about success being about the people and the experiences. And I liked that how you were talking about success being able to adapt so that you can create more of what you want and what you like in your life. And that's very much what is part of this show, is sharing how people can do that and how they can create that mindset to create more of that in their lives. So with that in mind, what sort of things did you do or would you like to share with people as suggestions how they can create more of that adapting in their own lives to create more of that success for themselves?
It's interesting. I don't know that people can be taught how to be I don't know that people can be taught how to adapt. What I do believe is that if they're asked the right questions, they can work out themselves that they've already got those skills and they know how to draw on their past life. So, for example, I believe that resilience is a part of being able to adapt. And so, in order to know how resilient one is, resilience is out there on a scale of 1 to 10, and nobody's there to rank you. But I'm sure we all have situations in our own life where we think, I adapted to that really easily, or my godfather, that situation was really, really hard. And the easier it is to adapt, the greater amount of resilience one has. And I believe that this comes from really unpacking all the experiences one has in childhood, through your teenage years, up to your 20s, and working out what did you do with those various experiences and how did it influence what you had next. And once you fully understand that, I think that that enables you to find an inner strength that you never knew that you had.
It's a really great point that you raise. One of the key things when people are training how to be a coach, and I'm sure you've done this very much with a lot of the things that you're sharing about, is that asking people to look at where they've actually shown that inner resilience or inner strengths before. So people might think that they, like, exactly like you're saying, they might believe that they don't have it, or they don't have that resilience, or they can't do it. But when you start to ask them, and I like how you phrased it, looking at the experiences that you've had previously in your life. So when you look back and you see the different experiences, you'll see that there's patterns where you've shown resilience, you've shown that ability to adapt. And so it's reminding, in a sense, reminding yourself that you can do it. And also very beautifully how you shared seeing where it maybe was a bit harder, or you weren't maybe as successful in doing that, and then understanding those situations and those types of environments as well. I think post-COVID, with all the economic stresses, etc., happening in people's lives, that this ability to self-talk around, I am resilient, we'll get through this and life will carry on, and next year we'll have, you know, different things that we'll be talking about, and the year after and the year after. But building that inner strength and that self-talk about, I can get through this, I've been through situations more difficult. I'm sure that, you know, having major heart surgery in India was probably a bit of a challenging situation at the time. So having those types of life experiences, whatever they may be, does keep building resilience and that inner strength and that ability to keep building resilience.
Yes, Michele, just for your interest, I sort of believe that vocabulary is really important, because the vocabulary that comes out is sort of what we tell ourselves inside our head. A silly example, I'll give you two. One is a silly example and one is a real example. In mainstream life now, when we go to purchase something, just recently I bought myself a new t-shirt. You pay the money and I say, thank you very much. And the person behind the counter says, no problem. Now, I don't respond, but in my head, I think it never was a problem. So why did you tell me it was no problem? Because me buying a t-shirt from you is not a problem. I'm actually, you want to sell me stuff and I'm here. So when all these people on this earth, and mostly the younger generation, answer no problem, I feel that that's setting themselves up for life that has problems, because buying a t-shirt was never a problem for me. And in fact, going out to buy a new t-shirt is a pleasure. So she made it a problem by telling me it's not a problem.
It's interesting. She wasn't saying my pleasure. You're right. She wasn't saying, when you said thank you, she wasn't going you're welcome or my pleasure or any of that positive affirmation back to you. No.
And I think that sort of thing is really important. And the reason that I said that is, before, when you said it's not successful, I don't have in my head the word not successful. It's the same as I don't use that word no problem in my mainstream vocabulary. So when someone says it's not successful, I'll use an example out of my own life. I've failed millions of exams, but I never ever thought it wasn't successful. I'm just like, oh, I didn't know that stuff there. So I have to actually think, well, I can either learn it or do the exam again, or, oh, it wasn't that important to me anyway, go and do something else. So I think that sort of mindset is very important when it comes to feeling satisfied with oneself, which is what your word of success, I believe, actually means.
And it's interesting that you've picked up on my phrasing around not successful, because you're right, it's the everyday language that we are telling ourselves, and like the no problem, the not successful is saying that linking something that may have been challenging or not quite worked out with success. So I'll make a mental note of that, because that's a really good point, that linkage that somehow is in there. And this is great, everybody, because this is a live example of working through that linkage that I've made then about success being something that when it's a challenge and it doesn't quite work out the way that you may have wanted it to work out, that equals it's not success. as opposed to it's just not worked out. That's a really good point.
There's an upside to everything in life, even the most traumatic things. You might not realize it at the time, but everybody goes through various challenges to a greater and lesser degree in life. They can range from being a challenge to a massive trauma. But at the end of the day, if you are resilient, there is something at the end of it that you never expected would turn out.
It's interesting because I have done things where even to call something a challenge is similar to the word problem or not successful, where labeling it in that way can actually, like we're talking about, then create that mental mindset around you're labeling that experience a challenge as opposed to a learning opportunity or a lesson or a chance to learn more about X, Y, or Z, whatever that might be. And it's funny because I love when I do speak with academics like yourself, people, you have such a profound interest in the choice of words, and like you were saying, the vocabulary that people use, because in a way your minds are very trained to look for it and to understand, more so than many, the power of the words and the power of the choice of the words. What do you think then? So we were just demonstrating there how reflecting on some choices of words and how some of those linkages and usage of them. But what do you think really has helped you with when you've noticed things like we're talking about, to go, oh, when I used that word, I was actually inadvertently doing this or creating this mental kind of construct. But if I change it to this word, when it opens it up, opens it up for me.
Well, intuitively, I've never spoken like that. So I guess I've never had to think like that, as opposed to I notice what other people do. So I wasn't raised in a household that had that language. So it's in my DNA not to be like that. However, what I will say is, growing up, we all have lots of situations that are horrible for us. And we have to kind of dig our way out of a tunnel to work out what's going to happen next. One of the little things that I had growing up is that I had an adopted sister, and my mother favoured her, and we all had piano lessons. And so what would happen is, if it was my turn to play the piano and my little baby sister would smash the keys at the top, my mother would say, and I would say, "Can you take her away? I'm trying to concentrate." My mother would say, "Just focus. She's not distracting you, just focus." And then when she played, I would never come and do the same to her. So growing up, I always thought there was a slight bias there. And at the time, I really hated that. I would scream blue murder, actually. But as an adult, what it really has taught me to do is focus. So if the whole world is crumbling down beside me, and in any way, either physically with loud jackhammers and drills, I can just switch off to that and focus on what it is that I have to achieve.
What a wonderful, wonderful story and example. I can imagine you as that child, learning how to focus on what you were doing, no matter what is going on around you, and that great life skill that you then carried through into the work that you've done all over the world. And I can really relate to that training and also the phrasing that you use there around how that opportunity from when you were a child gave you the great skills. So you've demonstrated, again, looking back as an example, and how you've positively framed that example and how you focused on the positive skills and experience that it gave you into life. And I think that it's a really good example of that. I know that for myself, when I've done many of the different trainings in the mindset sort of area, that one of the great teachers talks about how every challenge has a blessing in it and every blessing has a challenge in it. So if you get too mollycoddled, say, and have many blessings as a child, you don't learn to then overcome the challenges, like your sister bashing the piano keys while you're trying to learn how to play. It's a great example, because in that challenging situation, the blessing was that you learnt to focus. And yeah, if you
indeed I did. I don't mind sharing with you, because that situation went on for years. It wasn't a 5-minute one-off.
Exactly. And also, if the interruption had have kept distracting you wouldn't have learned how to play the piano. You would have stayed stuck on the distraction rather than the piano. So it gave you a really good way of learning how to block out those distractions, which I think many people, whether it's the distraction of the mobile phone or the distraction of TV or things like that, they struggle. In fact, I've been reading a book about stolen focus, because there is this problem within many communities now about learning how to focus. And I think you've given a great example to people of, well, when things aren't necessarily going your way and you might find it a little bit challenging, just keep coming back. And when I'm helping people to learn how to meditate, it's a similar sort of process, because they're not used to sitting in the quiet, and when their brain is still and the thoughts are still going through their mind, meditation is actually the learning to practice to focus, and you just keep focusing on whether it's a chant or your breathing or whatever, and not being distracted and not getting disturbed by the thoughts. The Buddhists have a really great example of that. They talk about it in terms of imagining that you're sitting in like a room and you're looking out through the window and you see people going by in the window, and those people going by are like your thoughts, but in the room you're sitting there in the quiet, and that's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to imagine yourself in somewhere quiet, and your thoughts are just these things, so you don't kind of try and grab hold of the people as they're going by, in the same way you don't want to get hold of the thoughts or the emotions that come up. But you've been to India a few times, so you will have seen some incredible ways that people have learned how to focus no matter what's going on around them in that very, very busy and crowded country.
I don't know that the ones that I mix with have learnt to focus in that chaos that goes on over there. It's more, that's what I bring to the table with the people that I work with. It's like, concentrate on what you're doing. While they're like, ah! I'm the one that's like, focus.
Oh, wonderful. So you're actually training them.
Yeah, so for a living, I run a commercial hand knitting unit in India. Before COVID, we had 5 villages and 250 women. I'll use that word, struggling to get those numbers back up again, and working very hard at it. But when I went there a lot, every village that we go into, we change the domestic violence cycle, the education cycle, and the financial cycle, because the domestic violence cycle is changed because of that whole language thing. The girls are taught to speak in an entire different way. So if they'd tell me a story, I'd say, so what is it that you wanted? And then they'd tell me, and I'm like, so what stopped you actually saying that? So that's how the coaching goes through, that we change the domestic violence. But the financial cycle changes because the ladies, come to work and they get paid of what they do. So it's like every village has their income double all of a sudden. So they're just normal people like you and I. When you have more money, they mostly spend it on their children, or they go out and buy a new sari. Like just last week, I asked somebody, what is it that you like about coming to work? And they're like, I like to buy myself a new sari. So that's the equivalent of us saying, I like to go out and buy a new dress from time to time. So, they're just normal people like you and I, but have never been exposed really to having lots of opportunities in front of them.
Oh, wonderful. And I think it is really incredible, the opportunities that you are being able to offer them. And I'm sure that it will settle down again over the next couple of years as everything kind of returns to normal, hopefully, or a new version of whatever the normal is. So these are really great examples, from the little girl learning how to sell and learning how to talk to people, to building, the adapting, and what you're talking about with resilience, and then the focus on language and how you're telling, what the self-talk you're telling yourself, and the coaching that you're doing beautifully with the lovely ladies in India. If there was one way or one key thing that you would say around your life and that success that you've built in the experiences of the people, and being on Nantucket Island with Richard Branson, which, for many would be like the epitome of success as well. What do you think is the key, one of the main keys that you've been able to use in your own life?
It's resilience with a capital R.
So resilience has really very much been the key for you.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. And through the different experiences and people and the travel, and you've done so much of that, that's beautiful. I know that people may want to ask you more, because there's so much fascinating stories within stories with your life story. How can they best get hold of you?
My email is Danielle@daniellechiel.com, DANIELLECHIEL. And
fabulous.
I'm the only person in the world with that name, so you can easily find me on LinkedIn and send me a message.
Wonderful. That's great. And Danielle, if you were to give some suggestions or advice to that young girl sitting on the counter, or to your younger self, even maybe 5 years ago, it doesn't need to be that long ago, what advice or suggestions might you give to your younger self?
It's a really good question, Michelle, and a lot of people ask that question. I'm sure you know that. But I don't actually run my life by that philosophy, so you won't be surprised to hear that answer either. So I've always said, trust yourself, and whatever you've done at that time was what you believed was right for you at that time. So I believe it's really wrong to go back and say, I wish I had. Because if you wish you had, you actually would have done it. So at that time, when you make decisions, everybody makes the best decision for them at that time. So life is a journey. And if you would have made the decision differently now, rather than expressing it through, I wish I had, it's like, wow, look how far I've come. Look at how much I've learned. If I knew that when I was this age, I would have made a different decision. So I don't actually place it into the category of right and wrong. It's like life would have been different, because that is the journey of life, and that is how we all learn.
What a wonderful, wonderful philosophy, Danielle. And I have had, interestingly, there has been a few people, a couple of people have said they wouldn't change anything, which is wonderful. Again, it reflects different people having such wonderful different philosophies. But I love how you're saying that if you were to look back, you would remind yourself that you made the best decisions you knew how, with the information that you had at that time, and you'll make different decisions today and different decisions again tomorrow, based on having more information and more insights into things. But I love how that all comes together for you, in not allocating right or wrong. And it's probably been one of those themes through how you've expressed your incredible life and the incredible work that you do with people in many, many different fields. So it's been such an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Danielle.
Pleasure. Most welcome.
Wonderful. And to the people watching, what another interesting, incredible guest that we've had today, sharing with us so many wonderful insights and experiences, and great examples that we worked through as we were chatting as well, around the language that we use, building resilience with a capital R, and using that as a great way to keep building your successful mindset. But for now, it's the end of the show. So from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.